Hello, welcome. This is Reanimated, the podcast about all things undead and zombies.
And sometimes other things.
And sometimes the occasional xenomorph. And it's the 28th. We missed LV-426 by 2 days. That's a shame, but we will have some aliens content in the news to make up for that. What did I say? Yes, it's episode 206 of this fair podcast. With me are the dulcet tones of H.A. Conrad, coming from New York. Hello.
Hello.
My name is Stuart. Did I say that already? Oh, gosh. Firing on all cylinders. So first up, we've got some news, and then we're going to get into Black Summer episodes 3 and 4, which are entitled Summer School and Alone. And so buckle up for that. But first up, we've got news. First news item is something that I thought was good, but also scary. The good part is that NASA and and FEMA and the European Space Agency are all participating in a exercise to try and stop an asteroid from hitting the Earth. I think it's not so much to react to an asteroid hitting the Earth, or maybe it's all the above. But they've come up with a fictional asteroid that is going to intersect with Earth, or has like a 1% chance in this fictional scenario, had a 1% chance of impacting the Earth. And so they're going through the exercise of what will we all do if this is the case?
They are training up Bruce Willis and Ben Affleck to
and
go up.
Aerosmith will do the soundtrack.
They are actually looking at all scenarios. So they're looking at how to avoid it, or if you could avoid it. But once it hits, what would be the path and what would be the impact? Like trying to track where it would actually land. I guess an early warning system. But what I find even scarier is that this is not a new thing that they're doing. They've done this before. And the idea is definitely terrifying. Much like supervolcanoes, it's one of those things that you really hope never happens.
Yeah.
But it was interesting to see what their plans were. I also think that when they do these exercises, it's also a good way to see how people are communicating information, whether new things need to be put in place. I've also I don't know if you've been following the news at all, but at least here in New York, there is a massive measles outbreak.
Oh, yeah.
And the government, or at least the state government, is basically saying that everybody has to get the vaccines, which is, if you think about this in terms of what would be like a public health crisis or emergency or whatever, it's been interesting to see the reactions, because some people are very unhappy about this. But it's deemed something that's for the greater good. And so something like this, you're looking to see that people are communicating what would be the evacuation plan, and I think addressing a lot of the issues that would, let's be honest here, if an asteroid, like a really big one, were to hit the Earth, there are some people that are not going to survive that, and maybe a lot.
Millions, yes.
So it reminds me of that book series, and I'm not recalling the title of it, the one that we read a couple years ago.
For this podcast?
Where it was the guy that, or maybe we didn't do it for the podcast, but maybe we were just reading it on our own, but it was like the former detective. And
the last policeman or something.
Yes,
that one,
yes.
That was a good book. And then there's another good book about called Lucifer's Hammer, about an asteroid hitting the Earth and like a post-apocalyptic scenario. It's pretty cool. Those are good things. But bringing up the measles, it's not on our show notes, but it's also been huge over here, because it kind of started I don't know if it started, but there was a big outbreak in Washington, and it kind of came down into California now. And I was in Sacramento at the state capitol last week, and they were voting on. The lawmakers were voting. They were making it harder to become exempt from getting vaccinations to go to school.
All right, on to some ethical.
I saw this headline.
This is a very interesting thing. So, basically, these researchers at Yale were doing some research into brain cells and sort of mapping the activity in brains, and they were using pig brain cells, but the problem is that using these like in a petri dish, it was difficult to see the 3D imaging. So once they're in the dish, it's kind of hard to see the connections and see the mapping and all that kind of thing. So their solution to this was to buy pig heads from a slaughterhouse and they injected it with this solution that apparently reactivated some activity. Now, there are a lot of interesting questions that are raised with this. They did use basically an anti-seizure drug to not have the connections be like, this was not consciousness, this is just some electrical activity, but they deliberately used a drug in order to dampen that effect, I think, so that from an ethical point of view, you were not doing anything crazy, though. I don't know if you saw, did you read any of the article or no?
Just the lead in the headline.
But basically, a lot of interesting issues are raised, which is, first of all, that if they are able to restore once dead cells, what does that mean for human patients who are in comas or have had limited to no brain activity? Could you bring them back potentially? And the scarier part of this article that kind of made me really pause was
it when they came back, they were angry or meaner than they were before?
No, they didn't do that. But basically, there would be no ethics. There's no laws that say you couldn't experiment on dead bodies because they're dead. So what does that do? And are these, what happens? They actually use a Princess Bride quote in here that's like mostly dead or whatever, and mostly dead is slightly alive. And there are no laws that basically dictate what they can do with corpses. And in this case, the pigs that they used were basically slaughtered for food. They were already dead. There's nothing to dictate the treatment and care of these kinds of things. And again, this was definitely, these pigs were not brought back to consciousness, but the fact that they could even revive those cells to the level that they were having some electrical activity in the brain is new and very scary. So at least in terms of it being no roadmap, in terms of ethics and what happens, when you think about that in terms of human subjects. So anyway, just throwing that out there, I thought it was an interesting thing. And I think there's a little bit of a sound bite that NPR put up worth listening to. Yeah. So try to listen to that in your copious spare time.
I don't want to.
I know.
I'm good. In other terrible news, not for
you.
I don't mean that really, because I'm still only on episode 8. I tried to go back and start watching Santa Clarita Diet again, and it's a slightly entertaining show, but now it's canceled as of like yesterday or 2 days ago. Netflix apparently dropped the axe, and apparently this has angered people on the Twitter. AJ.
Apparently, though they didn't give that many examples, it seems to be one person that's really upset. I'm sure there's probably more. I'm just being silly, but basically, season 3, they made it through season 3, and I mean, Netflix doesn't really release their in terms of what the viewership is, but I would imagine they had pretty good reason to cancel it. And look, the storyline is fun, but there's going to ultimately be a dead end or an undead end at some point. And especially for a type of show like this, I don't know how sustainable it is. I have not finished season 2, but I will do that and watch season 3 at some point. So it's gone, but there's other content on there, and I'm sorry for the fans who are really into this show, but happens. And maybe you can take some solace in that The Dead Don't Die is going to be coming out and is getting a lot of play everywhere. I don't know if did you go to see Avengers Endgame yet?
And yes, I did, and it was not one of our trailers, which I'm
interesting.
Curious. We had like Detective Pikachu and a couple of others, but nothing Jarmusch.
So we had Dead Don't Die, and then we had the Star Wars.
We did have Star Wars also, which I thought was weird because that trailer has been everywhere. So it's kind of like, well, this is a waste of real estate. I mean, I've seen this trailer like 30 times.
It led me to say that Adam Driver is having one heck of a year. So
just based on Dead Don't Die and Star Wars.
Well, he's also in Broadway right now in a play with Kerry Russell. So at least here in New York, he's like everywhere. But The Dead Don't Die is getting a lot of play at different film festivals. It was announced that it's going to be opening the Overlook Film Festival, which is in New Orleans, and that's also Cannes, which is like pretty good for a little zombie flick. But I will say that the audience reaction to Bill Murray was awesome. Everybody was very excited to see him.
The audience for my local theater, and I'm not going to talk about Avengers Endgame, but the audience was so into this movie, like cheering and clapping. This is behavior that I do not witness here at the
into Endgame?
Into Endgame, yeah.
Oh yeah, mine too. I think everybody's like super excited about this, but you're not a huge Marvel MCU person, right?
I mean, I've seen them all. I've seen all the films. I haven't read all the comic books, but yeah, I like the movies.
Right. But, you have to remember that this franchise started, and I feel like at least here in New York, a lot of the audience was much younger than myself and my cohorts that went to see it at 8:30 a.m. yesterday morning.
Wow.
Yeah. That was the show we could get tickets for. And for a lot of these fans, like, this was their childhood. I mean, this is like spanning years of time. So I can get that, and I will not give any spoilers away, but I thought it was well done.
Yeah.
So I recommend.
It was great. It was great. Finally, nope, not finally. Sigourney Weaver went to a high school in New Jersey.
Yeah, so we missed 426. Bummer. But Sigourney Weaver, as always, is showing how wonderful she is, and so these kids did an Aliens play, and she showed up, and basically there's footage of them all freaking out, as they should, because she's awesome.
I never watched footage of this play about aliens. Is it basically on par with something from Rushmore?
Yeah, basically.
Okay, like they're Miss Saigon or something. Okay.
Yeah, kind of. But she shows up, and she's very cute with them, and they're just beside themselves. So good on Sigourney Weaver. And when I went to that viewing at Town Hall a few years ago, and she was there and watching the film, she was equally awesome. So I'm not shocked that she's always just the epitome of grace and wonderfulness. So she just keeps getting better.
She does. And so does the news coverage around Black Summer.
Yes.
No, it's just weirdly divisive, this show, and I don't 100% understand it. Yeah, comicbook.com, which is comicbook.com, right? Their URL cbr.com. So, but yeah,
comic book resources, I believe.
Comicbook.com has become pretty prolific in their coverage of things like Walking Dead, and so of course they're gonna foray into Black Summer, and their beef is that Black Summer features when you die, everybody's infected, you turn into a zombie. And they're like, this is such a ripoff of Walking Dead, and it weakens and I'm like, okay, yeah, potentially you could make that argument, but I feel like that's kind of glass half empty and not really looking at this show with an open mind. Forbes has also come out really negative on Black Summer, or they had even before we started talking about it.
Yeah, and I have to say, I really don't agree with these negative reviews, at least at this point.
How far into it are you? Are you just?
I'm trying. I did go one past what we were supposed to talk about, but I am trying to, maybe I will change my mind if we get to the end of it and it's really lame or it gets lame. There's a couple of critiques I have of these couple of episodes, though generally I'm still feeling very favorably towards this, and I like it. I like what they did with this, and I feel like some of this criticism is just not. I just don't get it. And this part of the storyline, it's like, okay, so that this is something that they chose to do, but it makes the action more exciting. It makes the storyline a little bit more intense because you have to sort of you have to be aware. In general, like, it's not just about the direct bite contact and transmission. And, I do think it's kind of silly to judge it on this. And again, maybe I will change my mind as we get towards the end of this, but I have no issue with them taking that particular detail and making it their own. I don't know. I think and also let's just face it, horror movies borrow from each other all the time, and they reference each other all the time. That's part of it. And
right, that's not a nail in anybody's coffin. And with this transmission rate being as fast as it is, the zombies being as fast as they are, rather, there isn't really a 1-to-1 correlation here between Walking Dead and what these guys are doing, because, like you're alluding to, when one of your friends gets shot or hurt badly, you have to do like split-second triage and be like, do I try to help or do I just start running away? Mm-hmm. And I think that's novel. I don't think I've seen that before, and it's really interesting. And people on the show certainly don't get it right every time, as we'll kind of see.
Yeah. So anyway, I will reserve my judgment for the end. But with that note, why don't we jump in?
Yeah, cool. So episode 3 is called Summer School, as I mentioned before, written and directed by Abram Cox. And this one begins with the gang who didn't make it into the van. That is Lance, Ryan, Rose, and quote-unquote Spears. I think his character is introduced as Spears, even though it's clearly not him. And they're kind of running through a school campus, trying to get inside. It's kind of like dusk. It's twilighty out. You're not really sure what time of day it is. And this episode doesn't do a good job of showing the passage of time, because it kind of stays the same level of light throughout the entire episode. And even though I think pretty sure they were supposed to have slept for some period of time. So it's it gets a little bit confusing there.
Okay, so I will jump in with my first critique of this whole thing, which is, they're going into this school, and my spidey sense, so to speak, was just really, especially given what they have seen so far, I feel like they did not go into this with as much caution as they probably should have, given that it's a school. And there is a lot of, it's dark. There is a lot of ground to cover in here, and there's lots of places where the infected could possibly be.
Like, why didn't they go into a house?
Kind of, because it's just easier to clear something like that, or to know what's happening.
Well, they state this as soon as they get inside the school, too. They're like, it's too big. We're going to we have to split the party.
Well, right, but then, and then they proceed to just kind of, there's still a ton of ground to cover, and I guess maybe go into the earliest classroom you can, or earliest place that you can, but then there's stupid stuff that they do in general. Well, at least Lance and Ryan do. And it just bothers me, because I don't buy that this would be some of the behavior. So the whole piece where they end up in the music room and the drum part, because, those drums are really loud. So it's not just in the school that you're thinking about, it's outside. And did that bother you as much as it bothered me? Because it drove me nuts.
Well, it also drove Spears nuts, and they broke some drywall, and I hope they repaired that for that school, which was clearly just like an operating school. Like, I love that there was like a lesson on the whiteboard in the music room about like section leaders, and I'm like, oh, this is just, they make it also seem like people had just been having classes here recently, but because it's a set that they're borrowing. But yes, it was frustrating to see Lance doing dumb stuff. They also made a point of making him seem like a liability in this episode. Yep. And they did that well. But considering that the next episode is like all about him. Yeah. They do a good job in this one of making him and Ryan seem like liabilities. And it's really just Rose and Spears who are keeping it together. How much of a parallel do you feel with Kim Dickens' character from Fear the Walking Dead and Jamie King?
I think there's a bit of a parallel, but I feel like Rose does a better job at being more valuable and more getting down to business and less talk. And I like Kim Dickens. I think I liked her character, as you know, on Fear the Walking Dead, and I think they did a huge disservice to her in the way that they developed that character. But I almost feel like this would be this would have been the better way to go. She never changes sort of her directive, which is that she needs to find her daughter.
Well, but that's the thing. That's actually kind of my question about Rose is, you don't really, she does say like she has to get to the stadium once or twice. I don't think she talks about it in this episode very much.
She doesn't, but that's what I like, is because,
it doesn't seem like she has a one-track mind. She's thinking about other things.
Right, and she's also very, in terms of her interaction with Spears, I feel like they have each other's back.
Yeah.
And they've had it since he saved her. And
Right.
I feel like that was such tremendous relationship building, character relationship building, that you don't even need to say that much about it. Those two operate, and it's clear that they view each other as being equals.
And they do a lot of that just through unspoken stuff, right?
Yes,
Like just body language and
great.
looks. And yeah, this show does a great job of that because, like we've said, dialogue not happening much. So these actors are basically getting looks across that transfer a lot more information.
Right. And also their interactions with Lance and Ryan, there is definitely a view from the two of them that they are the ones taking care of business and have to basically watch out and keep these other two reined in. They're not abandoning them, but they definitely,
Spears
even in
threatens
how
that. He threatens
yeah,
Lance.
Spears. Well, I don't blame him all that much.
Yeah.
Given the stupid drum mistake, which is like at this point, come on, guys, what? And even Lance's reaction is like, "Oh, sorry, man, I forgot." It's like, what? What are you doing?
As frustrating as that kind of behavior is, I also really enjoy the fact that they let the camera linger on Lance when Spears goes off to find some like bandages or whatever,
Yeah.
and he starts looking at a calendar and leafing through it, and he's just this. And there's another scene in the next episode where he does something kind of similar, and you're just like, yeah, man, you're just like trying to any way you can to think about not being in the zombie apocalypse.
Right. Well, maybe he's in shock.
Yeah.
But even in how they put Ryan in the little room to have him sleep, and they're the ones keeping watch, there's definitely, without much dialogue or almost any dialogue, there's a very clear definition of the relationships and what this team is, and I love that. Then it gets to be the next day.
Or is it because the light, it's getting brighter out, I guess, but the light has not changed much. But yeah, then they start hearing noises inside the building where they're at. And Spears' reaction is basically like, kind of, let's find the source of the noise, and then sort of, well, let's just get the hell out of here. And you kind of have to be like, all right, Spears kind of really has a good point. But we don't know how long they've been there. It doesn't look like they've had anything to drink or eat since the show began.
Right, but they do have, they have supplies and things like that. And
I don't know. They don't have backpacks.
They talk about it. They have the little sleeping bags and other stuff. They basically are the ones Spears is the one that they're kind of following, but
because he's the only one with a weapon, which is another kind of crazy thing about this show.
Right.
None of them even have knives or sticks or anything.
Right, which you would think at this point they would have gathered something.
And they're months into the apocalypse. Maybe
something.
We knew Lance was traveling with a guy who had a shotgun in the pilot, but he clearly didn't have anything. Rose and her family didn't have any weapons, and they were actually questioned about that at the military checkpoint.
Right.
Like, why don't you have weapons?
Right. Good question. So this is my other issue, which is that when they start wandering through the school, and there is this weird little kid that they see, and Lance is insistent that they go and find him.
Ryan and
sorry,
Lance,
Ryan and Lance, but more Ryan. And they decide to do it, and this was the part that rang a little false to me. I just don't think Spears would have stuck around.
It feels a little bit too much like horror tropey, I guess, too.
Yeah, and then they're all separating, which again, I don't buy that Rose and Spears would do this because they both clearly understand the risk of doing this. I do think Rose is connected with Lance in a way that Spears isn't, but the whole thing just felt a little too convenient to me and not in line with what we have seen with these characters. So I was definitely disappointed that that's the way they chose to go. But and this is what's driving this particular plot line in this episode. So I don't know, that bothered me. Like, I felt like there would have been a better way somehow to do this. But in any case, they go and separate and explore the school with the plan that they're going to clear certain parts and then meet up at the end. And again, this is a lot of ground.
It's way too much space for them.
They've definitely heard more than one whatever it is. So they've heard many footsteps. They know that they're not alone there. They don't know whether it's infected. They don't, they've seen the one kid, but this is definitely more than one kid running around. And I don't buy that they wouldn't just walk out of that school. So in any case, they don't, and that's where we go from here. And this is why don't you take the coverage from here? But what did you think about it. Did this bother you as much as it bothered me?
Yeah, well, it was disturbing, and it started to feel a little bit too much, like I said, like a quote unquote horror movie, capital H, capital M.
Mm-hmm.
But they do use some tools to keep up the tension. This show has a pretty good handle on how to create stress and tension from the get-go, and it continues to do that. But so we've split up the group. They're wandering around. They're like realizing that people are taking their stuff from where they were camped out.
Mm-hmm.
And then and Ryan and Rose get separated after they find a bunch of bodies in the shower. And so you're like, yeah, something is definitely not right here. And at that point,
the bodies have been executed. Let's put that. They've all been shot in the head.
Yeah, I guess it would appear that way. And they're a mixture of children and adults also.
Mm-hmm.
You have like Lance goes through a door and gets blown up by some flashbangs, and the doors close and lock, and then that is like, some of these things just feel a little bit too neat, especially when we find out who the perpetrators are.
Right.
And it's just like, yeah, I'm sorry, I don't think some middle schoolers are going to be able to rig doors with
tripwires
right? And flashbangs and all this lock, like all these doors that lock in this particular way. And maybe they make school doors differently these days. But I feel like, weren't there fire codes about not allowing doors to be closed and that wouldn't open?
Right.
So yeah, there's some issues. The loudspeaker thing, I'm really surprised that anybody would ever fall for what is clearly a child speaking through a loudspeaker. Right.
And this just feels like a total Lord of the Flies scenario where like, the kids have just gone amok and are somehow much more, yes.
That's what the writers want us to feel like, is that they've gone Lord of the Flies.
But I just don't buy that all these kids would be acting in this way, even with like the ringleaders. And again, I don't think they would be as good with the weapons as we have seen them, but hey, I guess we have to go with that premise. And then the other piece, that given that they have killed clearly a bunch of people and stolen their supplies, which I think is what we're led to believe, I don't know that they would have kept Ryan alive. I think they're having a little too much, like, if the game is survival, they seem to be having a little bit too much fun. And maybe this is what we're supposed to think, is that now the kids are in charge. They're just kind of putting the adults into these situations. But the whole standoff where they have Ryan as a hostage, mm-hmm. and Rose and Spears are in that standoff, like, why doesn't Rose just say, hey, he's deaf?
I know.
Right? And they don't do that. And also, when we do see where the kids have taken Ryan while they've taken him hostage, there's a lot of them. There's an enormous number of them. They wouldn't be this quiet in the school.
They're not being stealthy.
That big.
Yeah, they're using the metal shop. They're playing video games on TV, and yet the school is so quiet. It just makes I think they want you to think that this school is absolutely massive. Our four heroes haven't covered even a fraction of it, even though we've seen them go through room after room after room. But yeah, all these things are problems with this episode. But, and yeah, like the motive is also questionable, because I don't think these survivors, Rose, Spears, and them, they don't have stuff. So
they don't have that much stuff. They have like sleeping bags and maybe a couple of like kind bars or something.
Honestly, I feel like if you watch that first scene of them running into the school, across the school grounds again, none of them have a bag. I don't think they even have a sleeping bag. Maybe they find something to sleep on.
I don't know, but they have something, because they do like roll something out, and also they talk about the food. So maybe, I don't know where it is, but
they found it in the Lost and Found and some other stuff. But none of them have any equipment except for Spears has a pistol. That's it. Right. So these are not like, these are not whales. These are not a good mark. And you have to assume that most these kids are not psyched to have four grown-ups in the school, because that's a situation that they probably don't know for sure that they could handle.
Well, and also they don't know that these adults, look, we've seen, I will say, we have seen how some of the adults have been acting. They're raping girls. They're, doing horrible things. So there's a reason for the kids to be cautious, because they don't know the character of these adults. But it's still kind of crazy what happens. And so the hostage standoff, where they basically get the weapon that Spears has, or try to get it. They do get it, I guess.
No, they don't. They had another. They had
another weapon. That's
Yeah.
right. The little kid has it, and and it's exactly what you. The minute they had this and they said don't move, I'm like, oh yeah, okay. So Ryan's gonna die, and that's what happens because he walks forward because he doesn't know what they have said, and
Rose fails her dying friend triage test, which puts them at risk, and then Ryan reanimates and becomes a very persistent zombie who gets, and Spears cannot shoot him in the head, which is hard to do.
It is hard, and I actually like that because they do make it difficult, and I like that it is as difficult as it is, and also difficult when you're running and the walker is running. Like I think that's okay. And then, Rose and Spears happily escape because this weird bum, we know his name is Earl only from the sort of recap. I don't know that we know this.
I didn't know
his
name at all. Yeah, he's just the whistling guy.
He's like the whistling kind of bum guy who has like a dog, I think. And he basically lets them out, and the kids rebait the trap for the next unsuspecting group of travelers. So I will say the things that I did like about this, even though it was a little too tropey and a little too neat in terms of the sort of created drama and tension. I thought that the camera work was good. I did think that it was just in them running through the space and making the space feel like maze-like and claustrophobic. I thought that was great. And, so I think those things were okay. I just was bothered because I just don't believe that Rose and Spears would have gone in here in the first place. But, a minor point, I suppose. And also we should point out that Lance is MIA at this point.
Well, he went through that door. Well, I assumed that he was just dead.
I did too.
By the end
I
of
did
this
too,
episode. Until when the next episode begins. Well, it doesn't start with him. It actually starts with a scene from the diner. Right. Just a brief kind of like interlude. Oh, here's Velez, William, and Son trying to see if they can get out the back door, and then failing.
Son still, speaking her language, and it is very cute, these two, because she just speaks. He doesn't necessarily understand it. He just kind of responds, but he's never annoyed by it.
He editorializes on what she's saying, and he's just like, yeah, I guess that's East. Like he has any idea. But then he will speak to her in English, and she will like nod sometimes.
Right.
So
she knows some.
Her comprehension is clearly there. I think that there are some efforts going on, like on Reddit, and there are other articles being written, like, what is Sun actually saying? And they're focusing on other episodes where she has longer like monologues and stuff right now. But I think it'll be really interesting to fill in the gaps. And I have seen some comments from people who I presume understand Korean who are saying like, she's the most sensible person there. I can't believe. So it will be interesting to find out. And I know that the showrunners did this on purpose because they were trying to make a point about like how universal communication is and how you can get so much more across through body language and the way that somebody is speaking. And honestly, it works. But I am interested to find out what she's been saying anyway later on.
I do want to hear what she's saying. And I also looked this up to see if I was hoping that somebody had translated everything. They're not quite there yet, but I'm hopeful that there will eventually be a record of everything that she said during the series.
Yeah.
But Sun and Velez are in a unique situation in that they are stuck in this diner with the people that basically put them there, which is the inhabitants of that truck. The driver became an infected, as did their friend. So these are the two walkers that are kind of keeping them pinned inside. So you're getting that dynamic, and I'm sure we will come back to that later, but that's sort of the scene that is set up. But the main focus of this particular episode is Lance.
And Kelsey Flower, who's the actor, who I tried to send him a shout out on Twitter, and his Twitter's like hasn't been updated since 2014. But I really identified with this character in this episode. I mean, to a point, maybe not so much with I'm going to sit down in the school library and try to read a book when I've just realized that I'm by myself. I don't know. You never know how you're going to respond, I guess.
I mean, he definitely is the character, and we saw this with the drums. Like, he is not suited to survival generally. So at least at this point, we don't think he is. And he's just kind of like I think he's still in shock. And the library scene was really weird, but I also get it because it's like this moment of quiet, and he's just kind of like, I'm gonna pretend like this isn't happening. But manages, like, he kind of looks a little bit for his companions, but manages to get to the roof on the using a fire escape tube, basically. And it's like, it's definitely a cool scenario because he's on this roof and has to find a way down. I kept wondering, I don't know if you noticed this, but there was a big tree like overhanging the thing, and I was like, why isn't he using that? Because that seems like a better idea than trying to get down through some like kind of pipe things that you don't know how stable they are. But
I don't often yell at the TV, but this is definitely one of those episodes where I was like, why is he already climbing over the edge? He hasn't walked around the entire perimeter of the roof.
That's what I know, right? Because there could be other levels that he could get down a little bit more easily. Just goes for it. But that's, I also think he's panicked. He wants to get down. He hears different things. He hears stuff going on in the school.
Oh, and you know what? When he finally does get down, and it's a very painstaking and painful looking situation of him climbing over these fences or crenellations or whatever and getting down to like a sub roof and then falling from there. He looks up and guess what? There's people on the roof now. And so he just made it in time. And that, I think, is actually a really good element. Also, it introduces his main antagonist for this episode, which is unnamed. Right. The other prisoner from the workshop, the metal shop. I guess they decide the kids bring him up to the roof and shoot him and throw him over the edge of the roof.
Yep, and then thus begins Lance's marathon. And it is good. I mean, look, the good thing about Lance as a character, he is not in shape.
Well, he's not obese or anything. He's just a normal dude.
He's a normal dude, but you can tell that he doesn't really do a ton of physical activity all the time. He is basically running on pure adrenaline. He manages to because he gets injured when he kind of jumps off the roof. Yeah. So he's running on a bum leg, and yet is still managing. I mean, he is like, you can see I like how they play it because he is really running hard, but he's hurt. And every once in a while he has to pause. And when he pauses, he notices it, but he has to keep going because the infected is behind him. And it's a really good run through the neighborhood. Like, he tries to start a car. You get all excited because he
hides behind a fence and the zombie runs through the fence.
I know, that was so great. I mean, it was such a good use because he thinks he's being so stealthy. And I feel bad for him because there is like this level of desperation that Lance has during this episode that's so, it's like he can't get a break. But I
just wonder how many times shooting this must have been exhausting. Watching it is exhausting.
Yeah.
It's just it's nuts.
And then there is definitely, I feel like this was a total shout out to 28 Days Later, but he runs into the grocery store that it's totally stocked with everything.
Yeah.
And then they use the sort of they use the automatic doors to let you know that the infected has found him. And
I've seen some criticism online, and rightly so, that he doesn't disable the automatic doors after he gets inside.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know necessarily how to disable automatic doors in a supermarket, but I assume there's a way.
Yeah, but he also doesn't know what else is in there, so I kind of thought that, and again, Lance is not the most savvy in terms of this world, so I think he's just still running on adrenaline, and he gets excited because he sees food. He kind of like, there's a moment where he's just like a very brief moment of respite until the infected comes in.
But he doesn't eat or drink anything.
No, he doesn't. And then
and that same zombie walks in, and the race is back on. Yep. And we end up with this like mad chase. And they kind of showed this in the last episode too, when Zombie Ryan's trying to kill Rose and Spears, where they're like running around tables and like just basically playing it like it's a game you would have played on the playground.
Keep away.
Keep away, or like, stay on the other side of an object and we'll run in different directions. And he basically does that with the zombie around his school bus.
Yeah, and I'll also say that they have a sense of smell. You see them smelling and like they're tracking. So there's definitely some heightened senses going on with the infected. And they're definitely, it's interesting. And I think that this particular scene is used to show this, but they do eventually, like, they'll get distracted by another bigger noise or something like that. And if you stay quiet long enough, they do like kind of hang out and wait. They don't keep kind of problem solving, although in this case, you know, Lance ends up on top of the bus. Which, you know, it's still scary because the zombie can kind of grab at the edges, and they do keep you on your toes, because you're like, he kind of lies down in the middle of the bus, and I'm like, I don't know if you're enough in the middle, man. And it gives you this level of stress, and also, can the zombie get his way up there? Because they don't have as much agility in terms of like grabbing stuff. Like, they don't have the grip strength all the time, but this one does eventually figure out a way up there.
Yeah.
And
Lance's exit strategy is pretty great. The way that and the show does a good job of having this get resolved. Though I think the zombie might have been faster to get into the camper than they let it, you know?
Yeah.
Because he wouldn't have taken a minute to, like, jump off the bus. He would probably just jump. I don't know. We don't see how these things do with, like, heights. Are they, like, going to just jump off of bridges and buses to go after their prey? Or are they going to be, like, going down the slow way? So I was curious.
I don't know. But
he probably gets like 2 or 3 more seconds than he should have had to recover from falling through the roof of the camper. But then he's off again and makes it into the. From there, I think he makes it into the library, right?
The bookstore. Firehouse.
No, Firehouse, right? And this is an extremely frustrating scene.
Yeah.
He finally, like, he walks past the ceremonial fire axe. Finally, you're like, great, he's gonna finally do something about his situation.
Yeah.
And is foiled by a coat rack, I think.
Yeah, but I also will point out, again, I kind of like this because, look, if you haven't used something like this, if you don't use like, they're not exactly easy to wield. That thing looked pretty heavy. And aiming it and getting it at the head, I mean, these things don't really stop.
They're not going to stay still for you, yeah.
Right. So I actually kind of liked that, though it did feel very frustrating because you finally think, oh gosh, Lance is going to get ahead in the world. But alas, no. And he runs into a library or a bookstore. I think it's a bookstore. I think
it's a bookstore, yeah.
And then, again, they use the sort of automated doors. And in this case, the noise of the doors sort of indicating that a customer has come in distracts the zombie. The zombie, and this is like another good way of showing like different things that like what the mythology is with these guys and what their weaknesses are. And it gets like kind of spun up in the fact that this noise is going off. Like, it's not immediately coming through the door, which buys Lance a little bit of time.
Yeah, he was right on the edge of being discovered and eaten, and then he goes out and is like, oh, hey, thanks for saving me.
Oh, the guy that runs in to help him with the shotgun, yeah.
Dude he's been bitten, and Lance is just like, thank you. And I love the fact that that was the referral back to the title card for this little clip of the episode is thank you. And finally he becomes a survivor by his first kill being a person.
I know, but it's hard for him, but he knows he has to do it. So I loved this whole journey with Lance. I thought it was a good job. And yeah, it was, and he does better at this than Rose did with Ryan, but then again, he doesn't know the man. So, and he does this when the man's back is turned. Yep. So, I guess a little cowardly, but
it's pretty ice cold. So, your take on these 2 episodes, taken by themselves and as a quartet with the first 2, where are you?
In terms of how I'm feeling about it?
Yeah.
I really like it. Despite my criticism of the school plot line and that how that all unfolded, I still liked it, and I still like some of the character building that they're doing. I think I liked the episode with Lance a little bit more, just because I believe all this stuff about Lance a little bit more than I did about the Rose and Spears reaction to that situation. But I thought that the camera work was great. I think that the storytelling is really quick. And again, these are not long episodes. They are packing a lot in to like 30 or 40 minutes. So I'm enjoying how it's unfolding. And so far, I'm really enjoying the series. I do want to see a lot more of Sun. I think she's a very interesting character, and I'm sure we will get to that. But overall, I'm still feeling positive. And again, maybe there are stuff that I'm unaware of. You already watched all of it, so maybe you have a different take. But I'm not feeling the anger and criticism that others are.
I think a lot of people brought weird prejudice to this, just because, it's replacing a product that did have a following, and it's nothing like that. I think that's immediately going to create a lot of resentment in the fans of Z Nation. And then other people are just nitpicking, and that's just the internet,
Right. Well, I guess so. And again, I think you and I are in a slightly different, we're taking a different stance here because we're looking at this more as a standalone show versus a prequel to Z Nation. And I think that's almost how you have to look at this.
I feel like you have to look at it that way too.
Yeah. And if you look at it that way, I do think it's to me, it's a successful show, at least so far. And I am on board with what they're doing here, and I think that they're doing a very good job. So at least first 4 episodes. So, and there's always going to be some minor criticism and some things that the writers and the directors have to do to build tension, and I understand that. But I do think that they are using, even though they are doing some of that, they are using these things to build the world, to world build. And to give you information in a way that isn't sort of like hitting you over the head, and it's not with a ton of dialogue. So I'm liking that.
Yeah, it's awesome. And so we're going to keep on reviewing this show, episodes 5 and 6 next time. And I guess everybody needs to strap in and get ready for tonight on Game of Thrones.
I was about to say, this is going to be, I think there's going to be, I admit I was sort of surprised that they set the table as much as they did with the last episode.
Out of 6 episodes, they're going to use 2 for setup. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, I was a little surprised at that, but that means that I think we have to get ready for something big for this evening. So we shall see. I think we will, and I will say this, and I don't think that this is a spoiler. It's just more of a note. I think we can definitely say that something's going to happen in the crypts, just with the number of times they mention how safe the crypts are at Winterfell. Yeah. Did you get that vibe too?
People have been saying this to me too. We have a Deadpool going on at my office, and so
nice.
A lot of people are very invested in what's going on this show.
Wait, what's your bet?
Oh, it was a whole sheet of like who's going to be alive, who's going to be dead, who's going to be a White Walker. But the scuttlebutt around the office is so these guys can raise the dead, and you want to hang out in a graveyard?
Yeah,
is effectively the what people are wondering about.
And I think we can also, definitively say that Brienne of Tarth is a goner.
Because she had her moment.
It's just like the whole thing was called the Night of the Seven Kingdoms. I mean, you don't. And I will say Tyrion's little note that, oh, look how we have all survived. Oh, Tyrion, you just signed the death notice for everybody around that fire. That is all I will say. But
so
we'll
on that positive note, let's see how many of our favorite characters from Game of Thrones are still around next time.
Yeah.
But yeah, so thanks for hanging out and listening as we go through Black Summer. We're going to continue to do so. Hit us up on Twitter, ReanimatedPcast. Our email is reanimatedpodcast@gmail.com, and our show notes can be found and seen and clicked upon at reanimatedpodcast.com. If you listen to this podcast, you know what? This is not a sponsor thing. I use Overcast to listen to podcasts. I don't know what app you use, HA.
I think I use Downcast, but I've heard good things about Overcast.
So what I like about Overcast is it will fill in silences in the podcast, and it will do some leveling for you. So if we do a terrible job of mixing, it will play it back slightly faster to fill in any dead air, and it will do a little bit of leveling if our levels are not 100% on par. So that's why I use Overcast, and I recommend that one. But also, really, if you can, hit us with a review on the iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcast. That'd be cool.
Yes.
I guess so. Yes. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Ciao.
I said goodbye.
Farewell.
Ciao. Bye. Thanks.